You've been told the future runs on data, on AI, on cloud computing. You've heard about electricity shortages, power grids under strain, energy prices climbing. But almost nobody talks about the real bottleneck: water. A single, mid-sized data center can consume around 1.4 million liters of water every day just to keep servers cool. That's enough water to supply thousands of households every single day. Now zoom out. Nearly half of the world's data centers are already built in regions facing high water stress, and global water demand is projected to exceed supply by roughly 40% before the end of this decade. At the same time, the AI boom is accelerating. More servers, more heat, more cooling, more water. In places like Phoenix, Arizona, proposed data center expansion alone could push local water stress up by more than 30%. And this isn't happening somewhere abstract. It's happening in deserts, in drought-stricken cities, in communities already fighting over shrinking water supplies. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. What happens when digital growth collides with physical limits? Because unlike data, water doesn't scale infinitely. And once it's gone, there's no cloud to pull it from. To understand why data centers are becoming a water problem, you first have to understand how they actually work. A data center isn't just a room full of computers. It's a massive heat engine that never shuts off. Thousands of servers run 24 hours a day, processing searches, videos, AI models, and cloud storage requests. Every calculation produces heat, and heat is the enemy. If servers overheat, they fail. So cooling isn't optional. It's mission critical. The most efficient way to remove that heat is water-based cooling. Water absorbs heat far more effectively than air. That's why many modern data centers use evaporative cooling systems that rely on a constant flow of fresh water. On average, a mid-sized data center can consume around 1.4 million liters of water per day just for cooling. Larger facilities can use even more. But the water footprint doesn't stop there. A significant portion of a data center's water use is indirect. The electricity that powers these facilities often comes from power plants that themselves consume large amounts of water for cooling. In some cases, up to 75% of a data center's total water footprint comes from electricity generation, rather than the facility itself. Now add artificial intelligence into the equation. AI workloads are far more energy-intensive than traditional computing. They pack more processors into tighter spaces, creating higher heat density. More heat means more cooling. More cooling means more water. So when companies announce massive AI expansions, they're not just committing to more electricity. They're committing to more water use every hour, every day, year after year. And that demand doesn't pause during droughts. It doesn't slow down during heat waves. It keeps pulling from the same water systems that cities, farms, and ecosystems depend on. If data centers were being built where water is abundant, this story would look very different. But that's not what's happening. Many of the fastest-growing data center hubs are located in water-stressed regions, places that are already short on supply. Take Phoenix, Arizona. It's one of the hottest cities in the United States. It sits in the desert. It depends heavily on shrinking groundwater and the over-allocated Colorado River. Yet Phoenix has become one of the most aggressive data center expansion zones in the country. Studies show that if all proposed data center projects in the region move forward, they could increase local water stress by more than 30%. That's not a theoretical risk. That's a measurable strain added to a system that's already under pressure. And Phoenix isn't alone. In Nevada, data centers are clustering around industrial zones near Reno areas, tied to fragile river systems and limited groundwater reserves. In Texas, companies are building large facilities in arid regions where droughts are becoming longer and more frequent. Even around the Great Lakes, where water appears abundant, levels have been falling in recent years while data center development accelerates. So why are companies choosing these locations? Not because of water. They follow cheap land, tax incentives, and access to electricity. Water is treated as an afterthought. The assumption is that it will always be there, that permits will always be approved, that infrastructure will somehow expand to meet demand. But water doesn't behave like electricity. You can't generate more of it on demand. You can't reroute it instantly when a region runs dry. When data centers arrive in water-stressed areas, they don't just compete with other businesses. They compete with cities, farms, and entire communities for a resource that's already stretched thin. And once that competition begins, someone always loses. When concerns about water use start to surface, the tech industry responds with a familiar promise. Innovation will fix it. Companies point to new designs, closed-loop cooling, zero-water data centers. On paper, it sounds reassuring. Some firms are already testing these systems. Microsoft has piloted zero-water cooling designs in parts of Arizona and Wisconsin. Other developers near Tucson claim their facilities recycle water internally instead of drawing from local supplies. But here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. Removing water from the cooling process doesn't make the problem disappear. It shifts it. Waterless cooling systems rely far more heavily on electricity. They use powerful chillers, fans, and compressors to replace what water normally does naturally. That extra electricity has to come from somewhere. And in many regions, power generation still depends on water-intensive processes, whether it's cooling at natural gas plants, coal facilities, or even certain renewable systems. So while a data center may reduce its direct water use, its indirect water footprint can increase. In other words, the water is still being consumed just farther upstream. There's also a cost trade-off. Waterless systems are more expensive to build, more expensive to operate, and less efficient in extreme heat, exactly the conditions found in desert regions where many of these data centers are being built. So companies face a choice: use water directly and strain local supplies, or avoid water on site and dramatically increase energy demand elsewhere. Either way, the resource burden doesn't vanish. It simply moves. And when AI workloads continue to scale, when servers keep running hotter and denser, these trade-offs become harder to hide. Technology can delay the problem, but it doesn't remove the underlying constraint. There is still a finite amount of water, and data centers are demanding more of it every year. At this point, it's tempting to think this is a localized issue. A few desert cities, a handful of stressed regions, but the real problem is scale. Right now, there are over 6,000 data centers operating globally, and by the end of this decade, that number is expected to climb past 8,000. At the same time, artificial intelligence is pushing demand far beyond previous forecasts. According to major financial analysts, water consumption tied to AI-driven data centers could increase by more than 11 times by 2028. That would push total annual water use into the hundreds of billions of liters. To put that into perspective, that's comparable to the annual water consumption of hundreds of thousands of households. In the United States alone, direct water use by data centers has already surged from roughly 20 billion liters per year a decade ago to more than 60 billion liters today. And those numbers don't include indirect water use tied to electricity generation. This growth isn't slowing down. Every new AI model requires more computing power. More computing power means more servers. More servers mean more heat. And more heat means more cooling. The industry isn't just growing linearly. It's compounding. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most water systems were never designed to support this kind of demand. Municipal water infrastructure was built for households, agriculture, and traditional industry, not massive facilities that operate nonstop and draw millions of liters per day. So as data centers scale, they don't just stress water supplies. They expose a mismatch between digital ambition and physical infrastructure, a gap that keeps widening. And once systems are pushed past their limits, they don't fail gradually. They fail suddenly. When water becomes scarce, the consequences don't stay inside data centers. They spread outward. Communities that depend on the same rivers and aquifers start to feel the pressure first. Municipal water systems face tighter margins. Restrictions become more common. Prices rise. And households feel it immediately. For families, higher water costs mean higher utility bills. For farmers, it means reduced irrigation and lower yields. For ecosystems, it means rivers running warmer, lower, and more vulnerable. In some regions, water discharged from cooling systems returns to rivers at higher temperatures, creating thermal pollution that stresses fish and aquatic life. The tension doesn't go unnoticed. In Chile, local opposition forced tech companies to redesign proposed data centers after residents raised concerns about water depletion in drought-prone areas. Similar pushback is growing elsewhere, as communities begin asking a simple question: why are we sacrificing long-term water security for facilities that serve global digital demand? Planning and regulation haven't kept pace with the speed of construction. Permits are often approved based on projected use, not worst-case scenarios. Long-term climate trends are treated as abstract risks rather than immediate constraints. And once a data center is built, it's extremely difficult to scale its water use back down. The servers don't stop. The cooling systems don't pause. The demand remains constant. What looks like an invisible resource drain on a balance sheet becomes a very visible problem for people living nearby. When water is plentiful, these trade-offs stay hidden. But in drought conditions, when reservoirs drop and restrictions kick in, the competition becomes unavoidable. And in that competition, communities without political leverage often lose first. Here's the part that makes this crisis especially dangerous. Water systems don't have buffers. Unlike electricity grids, you can't ramp up production when demand spikes. You can't import emergency water overnight. You can't flip a switch when reservoirs run low. Most water infrastructure is already operating near its limits. Droughts are lasting longer. Heat waves are becoming more frequent. Population growth keeps adding pressure. And into that already strained system, data centers are locking in constant, non-negotiable demand. They don't slow down during droughts. They don't scale back during heat emergencies. They don't pause when cities impose restrictions. The servers keep running. That means when something goes wrong, the system has no slack. A prolonged heat wave increases cooling demand. A drought reduces available supply. A power shortage forces inefficient backup systems online. Each problem amplifies the next. This is why water experts warn that the risk isn't gradual decline. It's sudden failure. A reservoir hits a critical threshold. An aquifer drops below recharge levels. Emergency restrictions arrive overnight. And once those thresholds are crossed, recovery takes years, sometimes decades. What makes this collision harder to manage is that data centers are built as permanent infrastructure. Once they're online, they expect guaranteed access to water for decades. But climate models don't offer guarantees. Neither do rivers. Neither do aquifers. The uncomfortable reality is this. Digital infrastructure is expanding as if physical resources are infinite, but water is not. And as more data centers come online in water-stressed regions, the margin for error keeps shrinking, until one day, there is none. This isn't a story about technology going wrong. It's a story about technology growing faster than the systems that support it. Data centers don't live in the cloud. They live in real places. They rely on real water, pulled from real rivers and aquifers. Every search, every AI prompt, every cloud request, it all leaves a physical footprint. And when that footprint lands in deserts, drought zones, and water-stressed communities, the cost doesn't stay hidden for long. Water isn't like data. You can't compress it. You can't scale it endlessly. Once a system runs out, recovery isn't measured in quarters or fiscal years. It's measured in decades. The question isn't whether data centers will keep expanding. They will. The real question is whether water systems can survive that expansion. Because when digital ambition collides with physical limits, it's not the servers that shut down first. It's the communities around them that feel the impact. If this helped you understand what's really happening, subscribing is totally free and it supports this channel more than you might think. Thanks for watching.